This is Dateline News and Conversation. Well, my goodness, the past week has been a whirlwind. Donald Trump has entered office like a bull in the china closet. Tonight, we're going to talk about a number of things that Donald Trump has promised. Number one, we'll talk about Ukraine. Deal or no deal? We'll talk about Palestine. And then we're going to talk about something that is of extreme importance to my guest is space-based missile defense. My guest tonight, he's well known to all of you, Bruce Gagnon in Brunswick, Maine. Bruce, welcome to the show.
Good to see you, Regis.
All right, so Bruce, let's talk first about Ukraine. Donald Trump promised to settle it the first day he was in office. Well, obviously, he's been in office now for what, 4 or 5 days? And still, there's no peace. And the word is like, well, maybe 90 days, maybe 100 days. Bruce, what are your thoughts on peace or no peace, deal or no deal in Ukraine?
Well, it's very confusing because Trump has talked a good game about he wants to be a peacemaker. He wants to settle the war in Ukraine. I saw today that the United States just shipped a huge plane load of Patriot missile defense interceptors from Israel to Ukraine. So that tells me that the U.S. is trying to help Ukraine withstand the ongoing defeat that they're suffering at the hands of the Russian military. If Trump was really interested in ending the war, he wouldn't be sending them these missile defense interceptors, but that by and large have not worked very well for Ukraine. They're really an outdated technology. So that's just one example. I think beyond that, there was an interesting Time magazine story in the last days that reported that the US never intended to support Ukraine in a victory over Russia. They knew all along that it was not possible and that they were just using this to bleed Russia. And it appears that the people that Trump has appointed to be in his cabinet, to run the Department of Defense, to run the various intelligence and security agencies, are not peacemakers at all, and that they're committed to seeing Russia bleed. And Trump has been saying that Russia's lost 1 million people in the war, when people that really know what's going on say it's been about 100,000, which is still a lot of people, obviously, but a big difference between that and 1 million troops. So I just don't really, of course, trust Trump. And I think, like everything else, he's a bloviator and an actor. And I don't see much happening here. The only thing I can say that might give us some indication is him saying that he's not going to supply Ukraine with money or arms for the next 90 days. But then, on the other hand, what I read this morning about this Patriot missile shipment kind of blows that right out of the water, doesn't it? So, I just don't feel like I can trust anything he says or he is doing. So it's hard. It's hard to figure out where things are going. But in the end, overall, the broader picture, I think Trump is just going to accelerate the demise of the US military economic empire because of all the battles he's picking, whether it's Greenland or Canada or Mexico or Colombia or Panama. I mean, it's just an endless supply of conflicts that in the end, I think are just going to show the weakness of the United States and the brutality of the United States as it tries to reestablish its post-World War II dominance.
Okay, you're talking about Trump breeding conflict just about everywhere, and that's true. But I want to get back to a couple of things you mentioned. Um, the goal of the United States, the stated goal for several years now, has been the strategic defeat of Russia. I think now anybody with any sense in the Pentagon and these advisors around Trump realize that they're not going to accomplish a strategic defeat. And now they talk about, well, we just want to bleed Russia. Um, and then, Trump was on television and I saw it. And I mean, it just really pissed me off. He's saying Russia is in bad shape. Russia has lost over 1 million troops. Ukraine has only lost 100,000. The Russian economy is in tatters. It's collapsing. Bruce, I have to say this because I'm an American living here in Russia, and I have to tell you, we have not felt any economic distress, discomfort, anything. The stores are all filled with merchandise. The markets are filled with food. We're not lacking in anything. There's been a slight increase in prices, primarily not because of the sanctions and the threats, but because the cost of war. Um, and so I really have to make that clear over and over again. This is a bundle of lies. You mentioned that Russia probably has lost somewhere around 100,000 men. It's not been confirmed. What has been pretty much confirmed and agreed upon, Ukraine has lost over 1 million killed in action, many thousands more wounded, crippled, unable to return to battle. And what can you draw from the new goal and soon to be passed law to go out and get 18 to 25-year-olds who have previously been exempt? I mean, this tells you all you need to know that Ukraine is losing badly. Now, the last thing before I want to ask you a couple more questions about Trump and Ukraine. Trump has got to be very careful. Don't you agree that he is going to inherit Biden's war? He's been blaming Biden for this for 4 years. Bruce, he's already, I think it's already become his war because of what you just said, sending those Patriot missile defense systems. And so what if he delays more aid to Ukraine for 90 days? There's other money that's already been given to Ukraine that'll last them more than 90 days. What are your thoughts on Trump inheriting Biden's war?
Well, I think that's a really important point. And frankly, you probably read this too, that John Bolton, who uh, is a real hardliner, was in the first Trump administration as a operative inside of his administration. He wrote an article saying Trump needs to get out of Ukraine fast, and if he doesn't, it's going to be like Lyndon Johnson's war becoming Richard Nixon's war. And everybody forgot about Lyndon Johnson, and it hung around Nixon's neck for the rest of his time as president. And I think Bolton is correct in saying this could very well happen to Donald Trump as well. So I'm sure Trump has heard these words from Bolton. He must be aware of them. But everything we hear from inside of the Trump administration seems to indicate that they really don't know what to do. I read an interview yesterday with Michael Hudson, the economist, and his bottom line is Trump is not addressing the real problems, the real international problems, the economic problems of the United States. He's not really addressing the real problems. And when you don't do that, they just continue to grow and your problems mount and your solutions become harder to find. And so I just don't see any easy escape for the Trump administration because, you know, this whole McKinley thing, President McKinley returning to the time of the Monroe Doctrine and American exceptionalism and dominance and using those words. I mean, he's going back 100 years in American history and trying to replicate that. It's a different world now. You know, the global south is rising. You've got BRICS going on. Trump is now saying he's going to try to destroy BRICS by attacking using economic sanctions and tariffs against BRICS members to try to destroy their economies. I mean, he's declaring a global economic war, essentially against all American competitors, and telling the world that they either get on their knees and submit to us, or they're going to face uh, difficult times ahead. Well, this is crazy because, again, as I said at the start, he's picking so many fights right now that it's impossible to withstand the counter pressures from that. Even picking fights with their own allies, with like Canada and various European countries. So I just think it's a colossal mess, and the arrogance is very deep. But I also see that behind the arrogance is a real sign of despair and desperation by the United States, by the ruling class, by the oligarchs. They're afraid, they know they're losing control of the planet. And so they're rolling the dice like a black hatted riverboat gambler on a Mississippi paddle boat and playing poker and knowing that they're behind and losing money like crazy and going for broke and knowing that if they can't win with the cards, they've got their gun in their holster and they'll use that. I think that's basically the Trump strategy at this point.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear. Uh, Trump has said in terms of Russia, but basically, the way he's threatening the rest of the world is, we can do you. Now you can do it the easy way and make a deal, or the hard way when we're going to make you pay. Now, he said that to Putin. You know, he's got this language that oh, I love the Russians, they're good people. I like Putin. You know, I know him, we're good buddies. But then he turns around and says, Putin, you can do it the easy way, deal, or the hard way when I'm going to hit you with sanctions, tariffs, and taxes. Uh, Now, Bruce, deal or no deal? I have argued for a long time, and you know this, we've talked about it. Donald Trump, supposedly the grand deal maker, doesn't have anything to offer Putin except threats. And Putin, by the way, has nothing to concede to Trump in any way, shape, or fashion. Russia's stated goals, and they have been meticulously, daily working towards them: demilitarization, denazification, and a completely neutral forever, no NATO, no EU ever. Bruce, what's there to deal with?
I don't think Russia's saying no EU. I don't think they care if Ukraine becomes part of the EU, but definitely everything else you said, especially NATO, is correct. In fact, I think if Ukraine was taken into the EU, it would bleed the EU dry because they're going to have so many needs economically that it'll just become a like a cancer inside of the EU. So I think Russia could care less if they join the EU. But
You
yeah,
know,
everything, everything.
that's Bruce. That's a really good point. I mean, if they became part of the EU, the EU immediately becomes responsible for the rebuilding of whatever is
Yeah,
left
yeah,
that Russia leaves behind.
yeah. And the EU doesn't have the money. They're already trying to extract anywhere between 2 and 5% more because a lot of EU countries aren't even paying the 2% to NATO, right? So the U.S. is strong arming NATO members to pay up to 5% now of their GDP. Well, most of them don't have that money. So they're going to bleed them there, and then you're going to have them rebuild Ukraine when most of the European Union member states are collapsing economically right now. I mean, so yeah, it's this whole thing is really crazy, actually.
You know, in terms of the conflict and the fighting, um, yeah, I don't know what people in America are believing or what they really know, but Ukraine, in terms of their military, has been defeated. This war is over. Russia, gradually but incrementally, is leaping forward all along the front line. It's going to be totally up to Russia whether or not it wants to cross the Dnieper River. They could do that right now. You know, they're surrounding the last few strongholds, cut off the supply lines, they're encircling them. And if Russia wanted, it could go all the way to Odessa. And people in the US and in Europe are carrying on like Ukraine is holding on. And it's not a myth, it's an absolute disillusionment. It's a lie that they are allowing themselves to believe at the expense now of who knows, tens of thousands more 18 to 25-year-olds that they think are going to send to the front line. I think most of those are going to run. They're going to flee and get the hell out of there because they don't want to just be cannon fodder. The worst part of it is, and the evil part of it is, on top of what the United States has already done in Ukraine, taking those 18 to 25-year-olds, that's another 2 or 3 generations that Ukraine will not have to recreate, repopulate their country. Bruce, it's not just insane. This is evil being orchestrated by the power brokers, the United States, and the bankers.
Well,
All right.
it's the U.S. that's really forced Zelensky and the Ukrainian so-called government to open up and go after the 18 to 25-year-olds, which they haven't been doing previously. But the reports I've read are that 18-year-olds are leaving the country in droves, going into hiding inside of Ukraine, 18 to 25-year-olds, and that they're having to expend, Ukraine government is having to expend many more, uh, I don't know what you call it, press gangers, I guess, guys that go out and grab these people off the streets. They're having to increase the number of people in every unit that is out there doing that because what you're finding there in Ukraine is the community is rising up, especially the women, the mothers, the grandmothers, the aunts. They're rising up and attacking the Ukrainian press gangers who are trying to steal these young men off the streets. And so these crowds of women, I put a couple videos on my blog about it. It's amazing. These women are tough. They go in there and they pull the guys out of the vans that they've thrown them into, and they push these press gangers around. So uh, this whole thing is a farce. And in the end, they're not training these young guys anyway. They give them about a week or two training. I've seen many testimonies from them. particularly on South Front, one of my favorite sites to look at for the videos of these kind of situations. And they say these guys that have surrendered to Russia and then are filmed, they say they gave us a week or two training. They let us shoot 5 bullets because bullets are in short supply. And then they send us to the front. Our commanders are not anywhere near us. They give us hardly any water or food. They tell us to find our own. And then pretty soon, if we're lucky, we live for a day or two and then we're dead. And that's why we've surrendered. So this whole thing is just a charade uh, in order to make the West, Europe, NATO, and the United States, the citizens of our country, think that the war is going in a good way, but it's not. And now this Time Magazine story and other media are just beginning to tell the truth, little bits of truth, that it's really all over for Ukraine.
Yeah, and I'd like to tell our audience that living here in Crimea, there has not been a reported drone or ATACMS strike in at least the last week to 10 days. And we had been getting hit, not us, we in Yalta. We're not of any strategic interest, but, it was like every night, 10 to 15 attacks, drones or missiles were fired at Crimea. And suddenly it's gone quiet. Uh, I don't want to speculate, but I'd like to say that it hasn't happened. And one can only think that given everything else that Ukraine has experienced, they're just running out of everything.
And
All right.
you should add that most of those drones and missiles that Ukraine would fire at Crimea, probably Sevastopol, where the Navy base is their primary target, usually. Uh, they were intercepted by the Russians most of the time.
Yeah, it's better than 99% are shot down. The only damage that we hear reported are fragments of these missiles and drones that fall on houses, apartment buildings, or a particular uh, refinery that they're trying to hit, but really nothing of really any consequence. Okay,
But let me say this. Let me say this that in addition, the people that are really firing these are U.S. military uh, guys and contractors from the weapons corporations that built these systems. Because with Ukraine losing so many troops, they've lost the majority of their people that were trained to fire these weapon systems. And now that they're bringing in all these new people with very little training, they have to rely on the US and NATO military personnel and contractors to do it.
yeah, good point, and it's a good point to finish on. Uh, that it has to be stated again. It's the United States military and contractors who are targeting and firing and guiding these missiles, including French, including UK, uh, with their Storm Shadow and whatever the other UK missile is. So that's a good point to end on. And, Bruce, maybe the lack of incidences of uh, these shellings uh, has come to pretty much an end. It's been quiet. Maybe these guys have either been taken out or they've fled
Or they're dead.
or they're dead, taken out. All right,
Yeah.
let's shift gears. Palestine, you've been heavily, heavily invested in protests now for it's not just months, it's over a year, maybe going back to October 7th,
Yeah.
uh, in protest. Uh, I'm hearing a lot, and I've had a couple of people on my show who are well versed in what's going on in the Middle East. What's your take, Bruce, before we talk about your activity protesting? Uh, weapons companies in Maine and New Hampshire who are sending bombs and missiles to Israel. What's your take on whether Israel can continue to survive, to sustain itself? Your thoughts on that first.
Well, I think Israel is hugely overextended right now. They failed in Gaza. They absolutely failed. And beyond that, they're now in Syria. They're in Lebanon, where they failed to make any real progress in Lebanon. And now Israel has violated the ceasefire in Lebanon. They violated the ceasefire in Gaza. I read this morning that 80 Palestinians have been killed in recent days since the ceasefire has started in Gaza. So Israel is, first of all, a lying Zionist entity whose goal is to create greater Israel. And because they're so far overextended, they're going to fail. And inside of their country, this recent release of these four women from the Israeli military and that whole Hamas, you got to give Hamas a lot of credit. The way they did these women, turning them over to the Red Cross and everything, they made a big production about it. They had a stage. They had the women up there and Hamas people in uniform all over the place, holding the crowd back, a huge crowd watching everything. It really showed the people inside Israel that Netanyahu and his government had been lying like dogs, saying that we've defeated Hamas. And Biden was saying it the same thing. Israel's defeated Hamas. They've won. In fact, they haven't defeated them at all. And now they've had to open up the door, and these people are moving back into northern Gaza where there is nothing left standing. But the people say, we're going back and we're not ever leaving again. We should have never left to start with. So Israel is really, I think, in bad shape. And their image around the world is as bad as it's ever been. And it's getting worse every single day, especially when they're out arresting people for speaking out in defense of the Palestinian people. People constantly being arrested in various countries just for nonviolent protest, for free speech, for saying that they support the Palestinian people. So the desperation of Israel and its Western allies, again, reveals itself. And this desperation is because Israel is losing.
Yeah. And this freedom of speech, uh, even Switzerland uh, detained uh, an American, and Germany is passing laws that saying if you speak out in defense of Palestine, you're breaking the law in Germany. It's like, my God, you talk about fascism, totalitarianism. I mean, it's rampant all over uh, the EU. All right, I want to ask you about the protest. Now, I know that you and many of my friends in Maine have been protesting many times a week in different parts of the state. I want you to tell me a little bit about that, where you're protesting, who you're protesting against, and are you just an isolated um, example across the United States, or can you tell me that others are rising up and protesting as well?
Now, there's protests all over the country regularly. Although I did hear from one of the leaders of the main voices for Palestinian rights, it's kind of the key coalition in Maine, bringing together various groups. They, one of their people told some of us the other day that they're hearing from around the country, and people are saying, we're so impressed with Maine because you folks are really leading the way you're so, and especially in bad weather in the middle of winter, and sometimes below zero weather, people are still out on the street standing in the snow. In the last Thursday, last Friday, last Saturday, last Sunday, I was protesting in 3 different cities in those 4 days. And so we have different things we do. Here in Brunswick, where I live, I'm on the street twice a week, and we've been doing that since February of 2022. First, we started with a no war with Russia message. And then after October 7th happened, we switched to support for the Palestinian people. And so we continue to do that. And at the same time, we've been holding a monthly protest in various cities around the state. Last Saturday, we were in Camden, which you know very well. It's a kind of a tourist town on US 1, right near the coast. And we go every month to a different city, and we invite people to come and join us. And so we've been doing that for a long time now. And then on Sunday, there was a big protest and a march through the streets of Portland, the biggest city in the state. So, and that's just some of us. There are others doing other things. There are people standing on bridges every weekend. Our friend Russell Ray, that lives in Hancock, he goes to the Ellsworth Bridge every single Sunday, him and about a half a dozen other people. And they've been doing that for several years. So these kind of things are everywhere across the state and continually happening. And as a result of this, we now have 2 cities in the state that have passed resolutions in support of the Palestinian people, the city of Belfast, the city of Portland, calling for the disinvestment in Israeli operations within the city, selling off any stocks that might be involved in supplying weapons corporations, that give weapons to Israel. So there's been all kinds of activities, and recently our congressional delegation has begun to move about this much away from fully supporting Israel because of the pressure from the public. So they're beginning to feel the heat there as well. So we're very proud of how Maine has been going.
You were talking about the protests in the state of Maine, and you did say that the protests are going on around the country. Now, Donald Trump, in his inaugural address, stated that freedom of speech is back, First Amendment of the Constitution is back, we're going to do away with censorship, and we're going to have government transparency. Bruce, do you believe any of that? Have you seen any indication that, whoops, Palestine or maybe some other issue might be exempt from that?
Yeah, well, I haven't seen too much of it, no, especially government transparency. I don't expect we're going to see much of that. I will say this. I'm not a fan of Facebook. I call it Facebook. But Facebook in the last year has been increasingly making it difficult for me to post and share. And it got to a point where when I wanted to share something that I posted on my own page with another page, there was a thin line, just a tiniest thin line that I could click on. And it was hard to be able to get the mouse to click on that thin line that I had to post with. Previously, that it was a space that thick, right? So that it was never a problem. So as soon as Trump became president, I noticed that that thin line disappeared, and I was back to this thick blue line that allowed me very easily to click and share. And I noted that the guy that was Zuckerberg that owns Meta and Facebook, had said that he's going to open things up again. And so for me, that was a slight indication that he's been forced to do so. But now, how much, am I still being shadow banned? That I'm not really sure about, but we'll see how it goes. But really, I don't have. I mean, these are all oligarchs. I mean, I saw in one of your recent interviews, you were talking about watching the Trump's inauguration, his speech, and seeing all these corporate oligarchs sitting in the front row, uh, and these are the people that that have essentially put him in power, right? Look at all the money Musk gave him. So he's not going to do anything to jeopardize their support. uh, that Edelson, I think her name is Marion Edelson, who gave hundreds of millions of dollars to the Trump campaign. She was there on stage. He's not going to do anything to piss off these oligarchs. So I don't expect much. Uh, but I will say that we're already seeing some Democrats who uh, during the Biden administration didn't like to be critical of their party, didn't like to go out on the street and protest against their party. We're already beginning to see some slight change in that too. Some of the Democrats wanting to get back out on the street again now that there's a Republican in office, and something we saw during when George W. Bush was president, lots of Democrats would come to protest. As soon as Obama became president, they stopped coming to protest. There was a group in Florida that, I used to live in Florida and work there for many years, coordinating the Florida Coalition for Peace and Justice. And there was a group that I spoke to about 20 times in Delray Beach, Florida, a peace group. Every year they would have me down. And even after I moved to Maine, they would have me come back down. But when Obama was elected, and I came down soon after his inauguration to speak to them, I warned them about Obama. Don't expect too much. He's under the control of the oligarchs. He's not really going to stop these wars. And they liked me a lot, but they never had me come back ever again after that because they wanted to support their Democrat president, and that group essentially died, like many other groups have died, because of their slavishness to the Democratic Party.
Yeah. I want to segue now to something that you've been professionally involved in for God knows how many years, uh, weapons in space. Now, I was troubled the day after the inauguration. He had those three billionaires next to him. This guy, Ellerson, I think Larry Ellerson is his name, uh, announcing that he's going to give $50 billion towards AI infrastructure building. And I thought, whoa, man, that's something else. And I think that's part of the hidden agenda. But the one thing that you made me aware of, Trump is going to spend, or he wants a plan within 60 days for an iron dome. Now, Israel supposedly had an iron dome that hasn't been working too good. Bruce, what on earth is Trump wanting to do with building an iron dome? What is that all about?
Well, it's about military industrial, excuse me, military industrial uh, corporate welfare. At Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque, New Mexico, I have a friend there, Bob Anderson, with a group called Stop the War Machine. He specializes on space. He specializes on tracking the laser directorate there, headquartered at Kirtland Air Force Base. and they're working on laser weapons. They have a ground-based laser there that they've tested that can fire a laser beam into space, theoretically destroying another country's satellite during times of war. And now they're working on lasers as battle stations in space, orbiting battle stations that can fire lasers and hit targets in space, but also then hit targets on the Earth below. It's something they used to call the Death Star, and they've made progress on this laser development. But the big problem with a laser orbiting in space is how do you power it? Because it takes considerable amount of power to fire a laser through space. And the only thing they've been able to come up with is nuclear reactors. So imagine nuclear reactors on orbiting battle stations, firing lasers in space, themselves maybe getting knocked out and falling back to Earth and burning up on reentry and spreading their toxic radioactive substance in the air as they've burned up. So it becomes a chemical dispersal, if you will, a toxic radioactive dispersal across the planet. So these are the kind of things that they're working on now today. They are spending a lot of money on developing laser weapons. And for many applications, they want to have laser weapons on Navy Aegis destroyers. They want to have them on ground-based tanks and things like that. They want to have them on rifles. And, you know, you name it, they want to have it everywhere. They want to have them on airplanes and then also on these orbiting battle stations in space. So Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque is the primary directorate for that program. And Trump is asking for this Iron Dome, this shield over the world, protecting the United States from attack. Now, why would you want that unless you're thinking about doing a first strike attack on China or Russia or Iran? Because after you do a first strike attack, those countries are going to fire a retaliatory strike, right? To hit you back. And that's when you want this quote unquote Iron Dome protecting the United States from this attack. So that's what is in motion here. So for all the talk by Trump that he wants to be a peacemaker, he wants the government, the Pentagon, to let him know in 60 days, let me see your plan for this shield so that we can then contemplate and move towards a first strike attack on these countries, something that the US Space Command, the predecessor to the US Space Force, has been wargaming for many, many years. Every year they hold a computer war game where they practice a first strike attack on Russia and China. They call it the red team versus the blue team. And in that attack, they use various weapon systems, including the orbiting successor to the shuttle, the military space plane, X-37 it's called, that has shown that it can stay in orbit. It's like a super drone. It can stay in orbit for over a year at a time, orbiting the Earth. And in the computer war game, where they do a first strike attack on Russia and China, it's one of the first weapons used. It flies down from orbit and drops an attack on Russia or China, trying to take out their missile silos underground or airfields where their nuclear bombers are stationed, and then flies back up into orbit again. So there is a whole host of these technologies that they're working on to initiate a first strike attack on Russia and China and Iran.
Yeah. Now, your organization, the Global Network Against Weapons, and nuclear power in space. This is something that you've been working on. I know, I guess it's over 30 years now. Um, how aware are two parts of the question? People in Russia and China, for example, that this stuff is going on, and how aware is the general public?
I think the people in Russia and China know a lot more about it than the American people, largely because uh, since the corporate consolidation of American media into fewer and fewer hands, these stories are receiving less attention. Years ago, when I lived in Florida and I was organizing protests around these kind of issues at the Space Center in Florida, we got 60 Minutes covering our protests. We got New York Times covering our protests. Today, that would never happen. We can't even get today a local newspaper or a radio station or a TV station to cover these issues in a real way. Just excuse me, last October, we had a protest in Portland, Maine, at a hotel where they were having a Maine space conference. The second one they've done now, 2 years in a row. They're trying to make Maine a player in this moved the arms race into space program. They're trying to develop in Maine two different launch areas up in the northern part of the state. And we went there to protest. And Lisa Savage, one of our Global Network board members, lives in Maine. She was interviewed by a TV station, never got aired. I was interviewed by Space News, one of the industry publications, never got reported in Space News. So that's the way it works these days. So the American people don't know much about any of this stuff. And that's why we do the things we do. That's why we protest, we make videos, we put out a newsletter, we have webinars, we do all these kind of things to educate people. But it's a slow process because of this corporate consolidation of the media.
Yeah, you mentioned arms race. We are in another arms race, obviously. Um, Russia, uh, according to many experts, is 10 to 15 years ahead of the United States in weapon technology, their hypersonic missiles, their Orezhnik missile. Um, so the United States, because of its belligerence, and especially since, well, 2014, but certainly 2022, has forced Russia into this uh, new arms race to defend itself. Now, I am willing to bet that Russia is also working on space based weaponry. I have to believe they have the capability to shoot down satellites. Uh, you're just not going to hear about it. But in terms of the space race and the arms race, Bruce, the United States is already $37 trillion in debt. And if Trump goes and starts putting tariffs and uh, sanctions and punishments on other countries, Mexico, Canada, for example, 25% increase in tariffs, this is going to crush the American economy. I'm no freaking economist, but this is going to drive the cost of everything up that people in America need. And we're not talking luxury items, we're talking basic items. So is this new arms? It's not a new arms race, we're in it. And this space race, Could this possibly be America's Achilles heel, the thing that will cause it to crash?
I think it'll be a major contributor. Let me just give a little background. For more than 30 some years, every year, Russia and China have gone to the United Nations General Assembly, introducing a resolution called PAROS, PAROS, Prevention of an Arms Race in Outer Space, calling for a global ban on all weapons in space. Close the door to the barn before the horse gets out. And the US and Israel have voted against that in the General Assembly, but everybody else is in favor of it. But it's a non-binding resolution. So then the UN sends it to Geneva, Switzerland, to the UN Permanent Session Department on Disarmament, where a treaty would be actually negotiated. And there again, the US and Israel blocked that through Republican and Democrat administrations for more than 30 years. So today, the United States, Russia, China, and India have all developed what they call ASATs, anti-satellite weapons of various kinds, the ability to destroy other countries' satellites. So because the US refuses to agree to a ban on weapons in space, the US and Israel, they have enabled this arms race to go forward, which has made the weapons industry in America quite wealthy, the investors quite wealthy in those corporations. But indeed, when you're $36 trillion in debt, how are you going to pay for all this stuff? When you're trying to keep 800 military bases around the world open, when you're trying to have these wars going on that we have, when you're trying to give tax cuts to the rich, your rich buddies, the oligarchs. I mean, it all is a house of cards that is going to come crashing down. And then, as you say, when you start sanctioning and putting high tariffs on Mexico and Canada and Panama and more on Russia and China and lots of other countries, that means that inflation in the United States is going to increase, and the standard of living of the American people is going to accelerate as it decreases. And so that creates severe problems for our own economy and leads to our own economic collapse. So indeed, the people that are running the show, not just in the Trump administration, but before in the Biden administration, both parties, Republican and Democrat, they've been doing the same thing for years. They're either so friggin' stupid that they don't know what's going on, or they're doing it on purpose. Now, why would they do it on purpose? And I think we have to consider that that might be the answer. They're doing it on purpose because they don't care about country anymore. For all the talk about Make America Great Again, these globalists don't care about country. They want to extract wealth internationally. They want to drain the swamp internationally of all the countries. They want to make that all their economies collapse, and they want to take everything they can as they see climate change coming. They know that things are getting worse on this planet. These people are out to steal everything they can while they still can. And they don't care who they steal it from, which country at all. That's their agenda. And so I think that's what's happening in this country today. And it's what's happening throughout Europe and the other Western globalist controlled capitalist countries.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I've been talking about this. You have too. This is not the Anthony Blinkens. It's not the Newlands. It's not Biden. It's not Obama. It's not any of the generals. These people have sold their souls to the devil for money, power, and status.
Yeah.
And it's this international banking cartel
Yeah.
headlined or led by the Rothschilds and other extremely wealthy families. And I think this has to be pointed out. This is not the United States of America that is wreaking this havoc around the world. The United States of America is simply their dying battering ram. They're not going to need it anymore. And therefore, as you said, they're allowing it to collapse internally. And I think we're seeing the same thing in Europe. Europe is quite a bit further ahead towards collapse than the United States.
And let's just look at this. Let's look at this one factor. As a way to keep everybody distracted, as a way to keep everybody divided. I mean, divide and conquer was the number one strategy of the British Empire. The United States learned it very well from the Brits, right? They have this culture war going on in America today where we have these, the so-called Republicans versus the Democrats, men versus women, this versus that. And it keeps everybody divided and hating each other and on a super war front and verging on a civil war rather than seeing who the real enemy is, these globalists, these oligarchs, these international cartels, this international mafia, as I would call it, this corporate dominated system. Benito Mussolini, the fascist leader of World War II's Italy, his definition of fascism was the wedding of corporations and government. Isn't that what we have in this country today? And so these people have an international fascist agenda backed up by a military, and they are doing everything possible to keep the people distracted in the various countries, fighting with each other so that they can continually rob us. That's what it's all about.
You know, and hardly anybody is paying attention to Klaus Schwab in his World Economic Forum. And he and this Harari guy, who's his strategic genius, his philosophical guru, uh, they're not hiding it anymore, Bruce. They're coming right out and saying it. They want to reduce the population to their golden billion, get rid of 7 billion of us. They tried their first experiment with elimination and control with COVID and the vaccine. But, Bruce, they're right out there in public declaring what their goal is complete, total domination by this capitalist banking wealthy cartel.
Well, they call us superfluous populations, the useless eaters,
Yeah.
right? They don't need us anymore. I wrote about this recently in a blog post that has turned out to be the most read blog post that I've done in the last 12 months. And in it, I talked about the book by Kurt Vonnegut called Player Piano. And it was written many years ago, one of his early books. And it was set in the future where machines and robots and computers had taken over, and now you add AI into that equation as well. They'd taken over everything, and the young people, the younger generation, really had no jobs. They had no stake in the society. They had no future, and they had no present for sure, but they surely had no future. And in the end, the young people began tearing the machines apart, and they tore down the system because it was literally killing them. And that's what we see today. They see us as superfluous populations. They don't need us because they're going to have this transhuman, this machine human connection they want to make us into. And so, it's better to get rid of us all. So many of their strategies today are around that goal. When when years ago, when I was in college at the University of Florida, I was working part-time for a woman that was writing a book about genocide, the many forms of genocide. And she was disabled. She sent me to the library to uh, make a copy of a page in a book, and it was a chart from the uh, uh, Warsaw Ghetto in Poland that the Nazis had, and it was called the caloric reduction intake schedule. And the Nazis planned out if they reduced the calories, the amount of food the people in the Warsaw Ghetto ate over a period of a couple of years, they would starve them to death. One more way to kill people, besides the Auschwitz death camps. And it wasn't maybe 2 years ago, I saw that Israel has a caloric reduction intake schedule for the Palestinians. Well, now in our country, they're talking about cutting Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and other so-called welfare programs that have been on the chopping block for many years. And when you do that, you're going to reduce the lifespan of the American people because they're not going to have access to basic things like housing and food and medical care. And so America has its own caloric reduction intake schedule to reduce the population. This is called genocide. So they're running a genocide not only in Palestine today and in many other places around the world, Congo, but in other places in Africa where the Europeans and the United States are trying to extract gold and other resources, but they're running a genocide here in this country as well.
Yeah, well, you didn't mention what they've done to our food, the GMOs.
Yeah.
What big pharma has done has been poisoning us with their lethal injections and things that they said we need to fight off disease and they're not even concerned about helping American people to be healthy. What they're doing is they're actually accelerating shortening the lifespan of all of us. Um, yeah, it's a satanic, it's an evil agenda. It's the only way I think to look at this, Bruce. I think it's an epic battle. Um, really, uh, it's
Let
about,
me say this. I heard a story the other day about a person that went to their doctor, and this person had already had 8 COVID shots. And the person said to the doctor, I think I need another one. And the doctor said, why do you need another one? You've already had 8 of them. You don't need any more. And the person got very upset with their doctor and quit their doctor. So many doctors around the United States and around the world have tried to, uh, how can you say, overcome this media manipulation of this whole COVID story, that now it's very clear that COVID was a weapon. It was a weapon created by the U.S. biological warfare program, and that's why Biden gave what's his name, Anthony, the guy that ran the COVID operation. What was his name?
Fauci.
Fauci. Yes, that's why he got a pardon, so that he was protected against any recriminations for his role in that whole biological weapons program that COVID was. So this is it's really sad that a lot of doctors either quit their jobs or were fired because they refused to play along with it. But that's where we are today.
Yeah. And as I was saying, this really is a battle uh, for our humanity, who we are as human beings, physically, intellectually, and spiritually. It's an epic battle. And one can only say it's that epic battle between good and evil. Bruce, this has been really fun, really interesting. Um, Goodness knows what we're looking at coming ahead in 2025.
Well, the main thing is we all have to remember not to become so frustrated or depressed over it that we become immobilized. We really have to stay determined to fight, and not just for ourselves. We need to be fighting for the next 7 generations. We need to be fighting for the animals, the plants, the water, the air. We need to fight for all of nature itself to protect it from these globalists who don't care about anything but, as you said earlier, money and power and status. And that's and evil, really. It's evil. Thank you. Thank you for having me.